Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. Now, I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, but I think it is still fair to say that these guys are best known for their different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. This brewery is also one of the most reviewed ones here on the channel, and the beer that we're having a look at today is one of their latest releases through Stigbergets. It's a style that we have had from them before, albeit not in quite some time if memory serves me correctly, and we've only had maybe 2 or 3 examples of this particular style from them over the years, I think. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see how it turns out because it is one of my favourite styles of beer, so hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing the Gothenburg beers, because it is just channel tradition these days. And for this review then, we are going to return to the wonderful Stigbergets Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Be Forwarned. It comes in at 8.5% ABV, and this one is a West Coast double IPA. So yeah, I can't remember what the last West Coast IPA I had from Stigbergets was. It was at least a year ago, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, I got a bit of surprise with this one. I just was thinking I was ordering a new Stigbergets IPA, and then a little bit later when I checked the order again, it had changed and showed you the picture and it said West Coast double IPA. So yeah, was quite happy with that. But yeah, I always enjoy trying the new beers from Stigbergets, and this one should hopefully be quite nice. So let's crack on then and see what we have. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets Bryggeri before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is hugely appreciated. You can also go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on geography. The whole channel has a geography-based tagging system. You can also check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many others. And many more are being added, of course, as well. But let's have a little look at my brewery notes and tell you a wee bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri then. So, Stigbergets Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you before, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson. So, these guys own 2 bars that share the one kitchen. This is Bar Kino and the Hagabions Cafe, which can be found on Linnegatan in the city, and they opened back in 2007. But this building is actually an independent cinema. You'll find the Hagabions Cafe in the sort of lobby, atrium type part of the cinema, and the Bar Kino in the basement. And you can check out my out and about video that I did there back in about 2018, 2019, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, that's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, nice venue as well, I should say. But originally, the idea that these guys had was to brew a few beers that they could sell in the bars, and this led to them kegging the beer and selling to other pubs, and then eventually bottling the beers, which began in November of 2014. So the original beers that they were producing were mainly English and German styles, but of course more recently they started, or a little bit after that, they started brewing the more hoppy American styles of beer, and this was where they really started to make their name. So the original head brewer was Ole Anderson, who is one of the co-owners as well of OO Brewing. He left the company, I believe, in April of 2017, and he was replaced for a short period of time by Barnaby Struve, who was the vice president at Three Floyds in Munster in Indiana, near Chicago over in the US and America. But it was Ole Anderson who created the Amazing Haze, which is one of the flagship Stigbergets beers, along with the what is now called the new and improved GBG Beer Week beer. That was the GBG Beer Week beer for 2016, and those are 2 of the kind of cult classic Swedish New England IPAs. Around the same time, he also created the Narangi for OO Brewing, and that is still one of their flagship beers. But around this time, when Barnaby Struve left, they moved to a new brewery at Partihalana where they were brewing 5,000 litre batches at a time, and they also began working on some sour beers there as well, releasing some Berliner Weisses and Goses and stuff like this. But they started selling their beers there in 440ml cans. If you go back to some of my very early reviews, you can see the old school 330ml bottles, but this allowed them actually to export their beers more, and they started to make a name for themselves across Europe. But these days they've got a brew team of Ollie Banks, who used to work for Beavertown in London, and also Lucas Munreid, who used to work for All In Brewing, one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating in the Gothenburg area. But these guys have moved to a new brewery quite recently, summer 2020, in Ringen, and they've been brewing some, lambic sour beers actually, and we reviewed the first one of those just about a month or so ago, and they've got the possibility there for swimming facilities and also a bar as well, which I believe they have opened at periods, and we'll need to see how that goes. That is somewhere I do want to visit. They also opened up a bar in Stockholm in about April of 2020, and they've got their own folk öl shop in Gothenburg as well. But as of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 155, 160 different kinds of beer, and like I said to you, they are known mainly for their different kinds of New England hazy IPA. But yeah, that's everything that I can really tell you about Stigbergets Bryggeri for the moment. We will no doubt have more to add to that in the near future, but if you want to learn more, again, check out the brewery website. You can follow them on social media to keep up to date with the latest goings on, and you can check out their Untappd page to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that they've done, or you can check out some of my older reviews if you are so inclined. But yeah, let's crack on and see what this beer is going to have in store for us. So like I said to you, this one was released as part of the Lokalt Osmoskalligt assortment through Stigbergets here in Sweden for October of 2022. I believe this one cost me 55 Swedish kroner, so that is €5.50, £5 sterling, somewhere in the region of $6 American. And yeah, as you can see, the artwork on this one is quite nice. You've got a nice kind of cactus there. 440ml can, of course, and which is standard for Europe. But yeah, quite like this. And as I say, just very curious to try a double West Coast IPA from Stigbergets again, because it has been quite a wee while. I couldn't find any information about what hops and things were in this one. There just didn't really seem to be anything out there actually. But yeah, let's get this guy out and see how we get on. Be forewarned, West Coast double IPA should be very, very nice. Yes, I really can't remember what the last one that I had from this brewery in the West Coast category was. There has been a couple, but as I say, it's been quite some time actually. So let's have a little look at this then. Yes. That does look pretty damn good, I have to say. So, as you can see, this beer has poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head. You've got some medium sized bubbles in there. It does look pretty nice, but yeah, you've got some nice kind of medium sized bubbles there, and you can see that the beer, I'd say the head is kind of slightly cream coloured. It's not perfect white, but you can see we've got a lovely kind of very rich amber colour to this one, which is kind of what you would expect from a West Coast IPA. You can see this one has that more kind of naturally unfiltered type haze to it, as opposed to the soupy gloopy sort of stuff you would see from the New England IPAs. And of course, one of the main differences between the New England IPAs and the West Coast is that for the most part, these ones use only barley malt, whereas the New Englands will also use wheat and oats, which is what gives them their haziness. When it comes to West Coast IPAs, for me, there's two ways this style can go. They can either be more oily, such as the Sierra Nevada Torpedo, or they oily and caramelly, or they can be a little bit more bready and biscuity, such as the Pliny the Elder from Russian River Brewing, somewhere that I do want to go as well. But yeah, when it comes to West Coast IPAs, I think this one is going to be more of a kind of rich caramelly kind of flavour. This one, just going from the colour of it, as you can see, this beer has that really nice kind of rich sort of amber note to it. And remember, the colour of the beer depends very much on the type of type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. The length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour beer. But usually for IPAs, you're talking about 90 minutes for a wort boil. Any barrel aging that you do and any adjuncts that you put in will affect that as well. But yeah, those are normally variables that you do not have to care about when it comes to IPAs of any description. But yeah, a very nice looking West Coast double IPA, this one, I have to say. Other than that, I don't think we need to say anything about the appearance of the beer. Not too much in the way of visible carbonation, just one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side and a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look very, very nice. So yeah, looks good. So let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one and just see what we have. It certainly looks the part of a West Coast double IPA. I suspect this is going to be a more oily, caramelly example of the style. But we need to see, because sometimes these beers, there are new versions of the West Coast IPA which are not as bitter as the more old school ones were. So let's see what we have here. Oh yeah, I think this one is going to have a good little bit of bitterness, because you can smell the depth of the green component already in this. And there is something that's telling me there is a little bit of sea hop in here, you know, the Citra, Chinook, Columbus, Cascade. There is just something quite familiar about this beer. So I think this might be a more old school beer in terms of its bittering hops and things. But yeah, you certainly can smell there's a nice deep green component there. You do get a good little bit of sweetness in the malt base, and you've also got that big oily kind of fruity character as well. But yeah, aroma wise, this one is quite nice. So yeah, I'm going to just say that I'm looking forward to this. But let's break the aroma down and actually describe it a wee bit more in depth for you, and then we'll actually taste the thing. So yeah, with this beer, I've got a feeling this is going to be kind of somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. It's not too caramelly and it's not too bready or biscuity either. The malt base is somewhere in the middle. So backbone of the beer, you can absolutely smell a little bit of that kind of fresh, slightly flowery, hedgehog white bread crust in there. On top of that, you've got a little bit of a on top of that bread crust, you've got a little bit of a kind of fresh white bready character in there. There is a little bit of a more wholemeal brown bready note. So yeah, fresh white bread crust, white bready notes, a little bit of a kind of wholemeal brown bread sort of thing. Then you've also got that little bit of as I say, you've got that little bit of kind of brown sugar on top of it. As I say, the main difference between a West Coast, there's a few differences between the West Coast and the New Englands to do with hopping and malt, but yeah, the main difference between the West Coast IPAs and the New Englands and the malty side of things is the kind of brown sugary notes. And for me, this one gives you that old school kind of caramelly note, and you can smell the breadiness that you get out of this beer from the German malt. I'm pretty sure it's a bit of crystal and things. There'll be some crystal malts in this. But it's absolutely lovely. So you get that big, oily, sweet caramel out of this one, and it's kind of boozy at the same time. There's a little touch of that kind of Werther's Original butter candy butterscotch too. A little bit of diacetyl, I guess we could say, but not too much. It is more of a sweet caramel. But underneath that, you've got a wee bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuit. So, yeah, aroma-wise, this goes together really nicely in that sense. The malty base in this is exactly what you'd expect of the style. It doesn't do anything surprising, this one, but it is like properly old school, and like I say, a more oily, caramelly leaning beer, this one, but it does have a significant bready quality to it, and the bread's actually quite dense, so I'm curious as to whether there might be a little bit of wheat in this one, but it says no, actually. It says there's not any wheat in this one. Now, as I say, mostly in these beers, the malt base is just barley malt, but it's not unheard of to use a little bit of wheat or a little bit of oat. That I think Sculpin from Ballast Point, of course, was an example where they used a little bit of wheat, if I remember correctly. So yeah, the density of the bread in this beer is quite interesting. But let's move on to the hoppy side of the beer. I think we've said everything we need to about the malty, the kind of malty and yeasty side of the beer. So on the hoppy side of things, you do get this nice deep green component. There's a little touch of earthiness in there, but you've also got that deep kind of slightly piney resinous character coming out of it. But I would say the green component leans toward a more slightly spicy and bright floral aromaticity. Around the kind of front of the nose, you do start to get a bit of a more zesty grassiness to it, but you can tell this one has had significant early edition hopping to it, which is making me curious to try it, because I do miss the bitterness that you used to get in these old West Coast IPAs. A lot of new West Coast IPAs don't have the same bitterness that the ones back in 2014 when I was starting out had. But yeah, 3 types of hopping when it comes to beers, of course. I'm holding up 4 fingers there because I'm being stupid, obviously. But yeah, 3 types of hopping. So early edition hopping within the first hour of the wort boil gives you mainly bitterness. Late edition hopping in the last half hour of your wort boil, a little bit of bitterness, but also some really nice kind of flavour and aroma notes. And then dry hopping after the wort boil gives you completely flavour and aroma. And West Coast IPAs use all 3. New England's tend to use just the latter 2 there. But yeah, with this one, you can tell that it's got early edition hopping because of the sheer depth of the green component. Now, when it comes to the fruity side of this beer, this one is quite interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if this beer has a bit of mosaic in it, because it does have a significant orangey character to it. But behind that, there's a little bit of passion fruit. There's that big oily mango in there. But for me, this one, I wouldn't, this could be just a Citra Mosaic beer. Of course, there's many other hops out there these days, and that's one of the difficult things. I used to like playing Guess the Hops with beers, but now it's impossible, just because of the sheer variety of hops. But there is something familiar about this. I get a little bit of passion fruit out of it. There is like a big oily mango, little hint of like pineapple or something. But for me, I get quite a bit of an orangey, oily character out of it. I don't think it's Amarillo. I've got a feeling there will be a bit of mosaic in this one. Potentially a little bit of Sabro, because it has a teeny little bit of that almost coconutty mandarin-y note. So I'd be very curious to know what hops are in this one. But yeah, for me, passion fruit, mango, little touch of pineapple, and then more of a kind of oily, orangey sort of thing coming out of this beer. But regardless, it does smell very nice, and it is a little bit nostalgic, this one. But like I say, a bit breadier than some West Coast IPAs I've come across in the past. But yeah, as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck in. But I think it is about time that we try this one now. So yeah, this one is the Be Forwarned, an 8.5% West Coast double IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish West Coast. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh, that's interesting, this one. So, I'm going to say straight away, it is more of an old school West Coast IPA, this one. As I was picking up in the aroma though, it is a little bit more bready. But as you go further into the aftertaste with it, it shows you some of the sweetness, it shows you some of the big hoppy bitterness that you want from this style. Yeah, this is solid for me. This really is solid. I like the fact that it's got a wee bit more bitterness to it. But as I say, it's kind of somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. It has a little bit of the kind of sweetness and things you would get, say, with the torpedo, more oily side of the West Coast spectrum, but it also has some of the bigger bready notes. So this one is interesting, actually. It really is. And I like, as I always say, I like, after 3,000 odd beers, I like beers that test my palate a little bit. And this one certainly does that. So, yeah, this is good actually. On the, as I say, this gives you a bit of sweetness, big green component, nice oily fruits, everything you want from the style. But yeah, let's break this down and see how everything goes together. So, middle of your palate then, middle third of your tongue. So, backbone of the beer. You absolutely get a little bit of that kind of bread crusty character, and to me it's almost a little bit toasty, so you get a little bit of that toasty kind of brown bready bread crust base there. On top of that, there is a little touch of a kind of crackery dryness as well, so bread crust and then a little bit of cracker on top, But then, pardon me, you have this really dense layer of white bread to this beer. And as I say, I was almost surprised when I was smelling the aroma of this beer. I was quite surprised that it didn't have a little bit of wheat or something inside it. Yeah, I mean the way that this beer goes about its business, I think, is really interesting. Um, yeah, bread crust, bit of cracker, dense white bread, a little bit of brown bread almost on top of that. It gives you a little bit of sweetness there, and the bread actually develops a wee bit of dryness the further you go into the aftertaste too. Perhaps toward the front of that middle third of your palate, it does give you a little bit of a kind of woody type quality as well. But yeah, the way that it goes together, I think, is the way that this beer goes together, I think, is very, very nice in that sense. Um, yeah, what can we say about this actually? It's the sweetness of this takes a wee while to develop, I think. But on top of the kind of white and brown bready layer, you've got this circle in the dead center. You've got this kind of circle in the dead center of your palate. So you've got an oily, yeah, you do have a little bit of a kind of oily sweet caramel right in the dead center of your palate. But then as you move further out from that, there's a wee bit of a more, um, yeah, there is a little bit of a more kind of Werther's Original butter candy note, and as you move toward the edge of the palate, it's got a bit more of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity note to it. But as I say, just very dense bread base, bread crust cracker, mix of white and brown bread, and then you've got the brown sugars on top of that. This beer isn't madly sweet and oily, and it's not. The more that I drink of it, the more I'm thinking it leans toward the kind of bready end of the spectrum. It actually reminds me a lot of some of the German brewed West Coast IPAs that I had back. When was that? That would have been like 2017, maybe. Some of the German brewed stuff that I had back then, and those were, I really enjoyed those actually. So this beer really does remind me of those in a sense. So West Coast IPA from Berliner Berg, well, I remember, and this beer really does remind me of that in a sense. But the more that you drink of this beer, the more the sweetness in the middle of your palate kind of builds, so you get that big boozy caramelly note in the dead centre of your palate, as I say, little touch of Werther's Original kind of note, and as you move further out toward the edges of the palate there, you get a little bit of the more biscuity thing, but you can also feel that the sugary notes in the middle of your palate have a little bit of an almost fruity character to them, and quite often when people were brewing like West Coast IPAs, I know that they can use a little bit of a fruited sugar, and I get the feeling that's what they're doing with this one, because it just feels kind of similar to a sort of homebrewed West Coast IPA that I had before, and I knew that when they brewed that, they used a little bit of like grape sugar or something. So this beer has a little bit of a similar taste there. So within the brown sugars, you get a little touch of fruitiness to this one, and I would not be surprised if it's something like that that Stigbergets are doing with this one. But I think we've said everything we need to about the middle third of your palate with this beer. Let's go to the back third of the palate then. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there. There's a wee bit of bread crust, but you've also got a kind of white bready thing. And then the base of the back third of the palate is more, it has got a little bit more of a kind of bread crusty quality to it. And you do get a bit more dryness out of it. It's almost like a well-fired bread crust on the back third of your palate. On top of that, though, not so much of the crackery note, but a big, tall, dense layer to this beer, which I do really like as well. So you've got that nice big, tall, dense, bready character there. More white bready, but on top of that, you do get a little bit of a kind of brown bready note. And the beer just has a little bit of zip on that back third of the palate. But above all of that, you start to get a wee bit of the yeasty character coming out of the beer. So yeah, you can feel on top of that back third of the palate, more of a, there is more of that kind of tall flavour in there, but yeah, you've got this airy, brown bready, slightly woody kind of flavour there sitting on top of the slightly brown bready layer that you have. So as I always say, back third of the palate, the flavour is definitely taller. Then as you come further forward on the palate, it just condenses down and squashes together that wee bit more. But you, as I say, there's significant breadiness to this beer, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, let's kind of focus on the hoppy side of the beer then. I'm curious about this. So, back corners of the palate, there's absolutely a little bit of earthiness in there. So, makes me think a wee bit of mosaic. But the green component in this beer is very deep, and again, to me, that indicates, that does indicate early edition hopping. So, as you move along the front of this toward the front of your palate with this beer, along the sides of your tongue, there is definitely a little bit of piney resin in there. You can feel that depth to it, but there's also a good little bit of spicy floral character just sitting on top. Round the front curve of the tongue, you've got a little bit of that lighter, grassy note to the beer, and yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is very, very nice. So, yeah, you've got a little bit of that oily, grassy character around the front of your tongue there, and yeah, it goes together. Yeah, as I say, it does go together very, very nicely in that sense. So nice oily grassiness there, a wee bit of zestiness, but that deep piney resin and kind of floral spicy note to it. I think they might have used a little bit of Columbus or Chinook in this beer. There is just something familiar about these bittering hops, and Columbus and Chinook are two of the classics that could potentially have been used in here. Potentially both. But yeah, let's focus on the front third of your palate and the kind of fruitiness that the beer has. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up, and you can feel that the base of the front third of your beer is a more smooth, kind of white bready type thing. And on top of that, you're getting the nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So toward the back of that front third of your palate, there's definitely a kind of stronger grapefruity note, and that's something that makes me think there might be some Chinook in this beer. So yeah, definitely a wee bit of Chinook in there. As you move further forward, there is a little touch of passion fruit, I think, but more of a kind of oily mango. So I think I think there might be some citra in this. This just feels very familiar. It feels like a kind of sea hop IPA in some ways, but maybe something else in there as well. So yeah, back of that front third of your palate, bit of grapefruit for sure, quite strong. Wee bit of passion fruit as you move further forward. A more oily mango note. Underneath that, there's a teeny little bit of an apricot and a little bit of pineapple character as well. But as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, there's a more kind of oily, there is definitely more of a kind of oily orange type note to the beer as well. So yeah, definitely a wee bit of an oily orangey sort of thing going on. And is there anything else in there? It's actually a bit more of a kind of tangerine character. So again, that makes me kind of wonder about mosaic. But yeah, grapefruit, passion fruit, oily mango, wee bit of a tiny bit of apricot underneath, wee bit of pineapple maybe, but not so much pineapple. Then a more oily orangey character. Although I would say toward the kind of front tip of your tongue, there is a little touch of lime in there, and that kind of blends in with the kind of more zesty, grassy esters on the front tip of your tongue as well. So yeah, that would be another indicator of citra, or maybe there's a wee bit of like equinaut or something in this. But yeah, this strikes me as being more of an old school kind of sea hop type IPA, this one. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's mosaic. Amarillo could be another option for it because there are those orangey elements. But yeah, something along the lines of like, Columbus, Chinook, Citra in this beer, that would not surprise me. Cascade, not 100% sure on that. But even so, could be possible. I don't know. I would love to know what the hop profile on this beer is, but regardless, I like this beer because it is like a proper old school West Coast IPA, this one, but certainly leading toward the more bready end of the spectrum within that style category. But thumbs up to Stigbergets Bryggeri for this one. They've done a beer here that has the nice bitterness to it, and I think on this note we should move to the mouthfeel to round off. So for me, this beer is top end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is smooth. It has a nice oily character to it, but at the same time a good degree of smoothness. IBU wise, I think we're talking about 70-80 IBUs for this one. This one has the proper bitterness that you want from the style. So again, kudos to Stigbergets Bryggeri for putting that level of bitterness in the beer. It's definitely up there. The malt base, good and thick and bready in that sense. It's got a good degree of sweetness to it, but like I say, this one it sort of goes right down the middle in terms of the two types of West Coast IPAs that I would say you have. You have the more sweet and oily ones, Sierra Nevada Torpedo for example, or the more kind of light bready and biscuity ones such as the Pliny the Elder from Russian River. This one has the thicker breadiness and also some of the sweetness, so it's kind of somewhere in the middle. So that's interesting in itself. But as I say, malt base, thick and smooth, a little bit of sweetness to it, the hoppy bitterness, 78 IBUs, and there's a good bit of that dankness to the beer that you want. And you've also got the big oily fruits, which have a wee bit of tropical character and also a little bit of a more kind of oily citrusy note. But overall, a very nice West Coast double IPA, this one, and pretty authentic to the style, because the thing that's missing in a lot of the modern West Coast IPAs is the big bitterness, in my opinion. But Stigbergets have delivered on this one. So this beer has my approval. I think we can leave it at that for this one. This was a really nice beer to try. So this was the Be Forwarned, an 8.5% West Coast double IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg, Göteborg here in Sweden. Really glad I got to try this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed my take on it. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets Bryggeri, and we will return to these guys at some point soon. Slange it, skull, cheers. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll catch you guys in the next review.